Your salary is an indulgence, she said, like she was offering me a breath mint and not slitting my throat in front of the entire executive floor. Claire, founder's wife, day one in the big chair, and she walked in like she was auditioning for a villainous role in a Hallmark boardroom drama, tight bun, knockoff Herms, and a smirk that smelled like expired lavender-scented superiority. I'd been in the middle of finalizing a cross-department budget merge. Real work, not some vanity reorg on a whiteboard. She strolled into my office unannounced, flanked by a junior HR rep who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else, and dropped that line like she'd been practicing it in the mirror while microwaving fat-free popcorn. Effective immediately, she added, sliding an envelope toward me like I was supposed to burst into tears. I didn't even open it. I already knew what was in there. Some boilerplate termination letter dressed up in fake empathy, probably written by a lawyer who misspelled my name. I looked at her, really looked. This woman had never built anything in her life except maybe a Pinterest board called CEO Chic. And now she thought she was entitled to clean house because her husband stepped back. Please. Instead of replying, I reached for my mug. Navy blue ceramic with a hairline crack through the handle. It said world's okayest employee, and I'd earned that title every day for the last 12 years. I closed my laptop gently, took a last look at my organized chaos of sticky notes, and slid my mug into my tote like I was packing for a long weekend. Claire kept standing there, expecting drama, tears, rage, a desperate plea for mercy. She got none of it. I stood up, nodded once, and said, "Thanks for the indulgence." Then I walked out, no goodbyes, no scene. Just one last click as I deleted my Slack account from my phone in the elevator. Felt like removing a parasite. And here's the part where I gotta break the fourth wall for a hot second. If you've ever had your career yanked out from under you by someone who confuses nepotism with competence, maybe consider hitting that subscribe button and liking the story. Seriously, 90% of you ghosts out there never subscribe, but it helps the team keep exposing this kind of workplace carnage, one train wreck at a time. Anyway, the building looked different on the way out, not in some poetic life flashing before my eyes way, just smaller, brittle, like something that was about to snap. I'd given it 12 years, through 4 CFOs, 2 acquisitions, and 1 data center fire that I basically extinguished with chewing gum and curse words. I was the operational spine no one ever talked about, because if I did my job right, nothing broke. But no one likes the person who keeps things from breaking. They like the people who disrupt and throw buzzwords around while drinking cold brew with oat milk and calling it strategy. Claire wanted to play Empire. Let her. What she didn't know, and what made me smile the whole Uber ride home, was that I'd already seen the papers. Not the termination letter, the real ones. The M and a terms filed 3 years ago with our partner firm. The change of control clause tucked into Exhibit C, paragraph 4.2, which required, by legal necessity, signature from one specific officer title before any equity-triggering transaction could go through. Guess who still held that title? Yeah, this indulgent salaryman. I had them right where I wanted them, and they had no idea they'd just fired the one person standing between them and a complete legal implosion. Claire thought she ended something today, but all she did was start a timer. The Monday after she fired me, Claire walked into the office like she'd just been elected queen of corporate America by unanimous vote and divine right. She called it a town hall, but it felt more like a public flogging of every department that didn't kiss her Laubautin knockoffs on command. She stood under the flickering fluorescent lights in the main open floor, and with the grace of a drunk pageant judge, announced that legacy and efficiencies were no longer aligned with the company's bold acquisition vision. Translation: she was gutting half the departments I'd spent a decade holding together with binder clips and caffeine. First to go, internal ops, because who needs people tracking vendor compliance and logistics in a company preparing for a $300 million merger? Next, legacy devs. She replaced them with a couple of her old sorority sisters turned efficiency consultants who spoke only in acronyms and once tried to run a daily stand-up over Instagram Live. Then she axed onboarding. Yes, onboarding, because according to Claire, we're not hiring right now. Meanwhile, she was personally recruiting a former runway model turned brand storyteller to do press about our culture shift. Morale didn't just plummet, it bellaflopped straight into the break room vending machine and exploded in a spray of expired trail mix and Diet Coke. I heard they turned the customer success team into a single Google form. Meanwhile, Claire spent a week shooting a glossy video about innovation through lean transformation in the lobby next to a potted plant someone forgot to water since 2019. But no one said a word. Not legal. Not the board. Not even the founder, her husband, who sat ghost-like in the glass conference room most days, staring into a decaf Americano like it might eventually show him the exit strategy to his own bad decisions. And me. I was sitting across from Howard Morrison at a cafe that didn't have Wi-Fi or oat milk. Just bitter drip coffee and thick ceramic mugs that burned your palms if you didn't hold them right. Howard used to be our board chair before he got out early and bought himself a lakeside cabin and a telescope. Smart man. He looked at me like I was a story he hadn't read yet. So, Claire finally swung the axe? She thinks she's sharpening it, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Manila, unlabeled, clean. He opened it, scanned the first page, then stopped. I knew the exact line his eyes landed on. Clause 12b. Black ink, bolded, underlined twice by my highlighter. Any change in controlling interest shall require signature authorization from the founding operations officer on file at the time of incorporation. Howard let out a single, humorless chuckle. Jesus, Linda. You left a live wire in the drywall. No, I am the wire. For 12 years, I'd kept copies, updates, drafts. I never raised my voice in board meetings, but I read every footnote like it was gospel. The clause was buried under jargon, but it was clear. If anyone wanted to sell this company, they needed me. And now I was technically gone. No paycheck, no keycard, but my title hadn't been legally extinguished. You can fire an employee. You can't retroactively erase them from a contract filed with the SEC. Why now? Howard asked. Why show me this? Because they're going to panic. They'll come to you, and when they do, I want you to remind them some indulgences come with late fees. He sat back, tapped the folder once, then looked at me over the rim of his mug. What's your angle, Linda? I smiled. Justice, and maybe a little fun. Outside, the street buzzed with morning traffic and dreams of IPOs. Inside, the company I helped build was spiraling into a gilded trash fire of Claire's making. I wasn't going to scream or slash tires. I wasn't going to leak anything to the press or barge into meetings. No, I was going to wait, like a fuse nobody remembered lighting. And when the spark hit, when the lawyers finally blinked, I'd be the only one holding the fire extinguisher. Or the gasoline. The email came at 2:13 a.m. on a Tuesday, timestamped like a ghost had sent it. Subject: System Access Termination Notification effective immediately. The body was a beige block of auto-generated nothingness. No greeting, no farewell. Just a sterile list of revoked credentials, Slack, Workday, SharePoint, the internal dashboard I personally helped design during the agile rebirth of 2018 that Claire probably thought was a cult. No signature, of course. That would imply human involvement. I read it twice, then forwarded it to my lawyer with one sentence. Excellent. We now have documented proof of constructive separation without cause, pre-signing. Then I turned off my phone and went back to sleep. Let them scramble. See, most people panic when their access is cut. They flail around trying to get back in, like a junkie pressing their face to the glass of the methadone clinic. But not me. That access wasn't a leash anymore, it was dead weight. And Claire had just snipped it herself. Which meant she just unknowingly violated the integrity of Clause 12b in writing. By 8 a.m., I was sitting in my new office, and I use that term loosely. It was technically a glass-walled corner in a shared workspace near the courthouse, crammed between a bankruptcy attorney who smelled like peppermints and regret, and a 20-something litigator who wore AirPods even when he talked to you. The name on the door said Sandberg plus Roth, M&N compliance specialists. And the woman across from me, Jules, was the kind of lawyer who read footnotes for sport and once made a junior associate cry by quoting SEC language verbatim during happy hour. She sipped her third espresso of the morning while I pulled up the files. They've locked you out, she asked, not even looking up. Yep. Sent the email in the middle of the night. Classy. She clicked her tongue, then opened a folder marked Control Leverage Chavez. It was already color-coded, tabbed, and had post-it notes in 3 languages. They're pushing the deal forward then, desperate to close before someone notices the soft spots. Especially the one shaped like me. I minimized my email and opened the company's site out of habit. It loaded slowly, then glitched. For a moment, the entire header vanished. The CSS broke. Product photos stacked on top of each other like a digital junkyard. Jesus, I muttered, watching the homepage flicker like a dying star. Jules glanced over. Problems? They fired the last sysadmin last week. Replaced him with a cloud consultant Claire found on LinkedIn who once ran an Etsy shop. The site shuddered, then went black. For 5 whole seconds, the entire platform was down. 5 seconds in e-commerce might as well be a century. And I laughed. Quietly, not the petty kind of laugh. The kind you let out when the storm hits exactly when and where the radar said it would. Claire had spent 2 weeks declawing the company, dismantling the safety nets, replacing key people with yes-men and spreadsheet cowboys who couldn't find a DNS record with Google Maps and a flashlight. The deal was the only thing keeping them afloat, and she thought speed would save her. But speed without structure is just demolition. Any word from Howard? Jules asked. Not yet, he'll wait. They'll come to him when the buyer's lawyers start asking real questions. He knows I've got the originals. Then we wait too. I nodded, leaned back in the chair, and stared at the blinking cursor in my inbox. Most people would have sued already, or sent a scorched earth email to the board. But I didn't need to make noise. I just needed to be present in the right silence. Because when the boardroom lights flicker, and the lawyers start mumbling Latin like it's a seance, someone will say my name. And when they do, I want it to echo. The dinner was held at some overpriced fusion place where the table was made of reclaimed barn wood, but the wine list read like a luxury tax write-off. Claire had it booked weeks ago, long before the acquisition was anywhere near real. It was meant to be symbolic, a show of dominance, confidence, legacy. You know, the kind of optics play that people mistake for leadership when they've never actually had to build anything. She wore ivory. Who wears ivory to a corporate dinner? She looked like a wedding cake made of resentment and poorly laid spreadsheets. The founder, her husband, sat 2 seats down, quiet as ever. Lately, he'd become more of a haunted painting than a man. He hadn't touched a line of code in 6 years, but he still kept a GitHub tab open like it might one day open him. Every now and then, he'd glance toward Claire like he was remembering a promise he once made to someone far better than her. Across the table, the buyer, Dalton Price and Capital. Cold-blooded, billion-dollar bastards with shark smiles and forensic accountants who could make a CFO cry in under 6 minutes. Their delegation included 3 VPs, 1 compliance officer, and a lead counsel named Perry Simmons, who looked like he slept in a file cabinet and enjoyed it. Claire had prepped all week for this. She had her press team on standby, her signature pen engraved, her LinkedIn post already drafted with some motivational quote about scaling through evolution. She even had a bottle of champagne chilling in the CEO suite fridge back at the office with a note taped to it, for when they say yes. And for the first 45 minutes, everything played out according to her script. She talked in sweeping visions. Modern synergy, post-platform expansion, operational realignment, the kind of verbal oatmeal that makes MBAs nod while secretly scrolling Zillow under the table. Then Perry spoke. "We've been reviewing the officer history in your internal documentation," he said, casual as a paper cut. "Your most recent filings show a vacant line under founding ops officer. There's a name attached, L. Chavez, but no recent signatory entries." Claire didn't even flinch, that's legacy data. Miss Chavez was terminated, her role is defunct. Perry raised an eyebrow, folded his hands. "That's unfortunate," he said, "because your control clause, specifically Section 12B, still includes language that requires signatory confirmation by that role during any shift in controlling interest. No signature, no compliance, which would mean he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to." Claire's jaw tightened. You could almost hear the calculations churning behind her eyes. She laughed softly, like he'd just confused her with someone who didn't do her homework. "I assure you," she said, tone shifting into performative calm, "our legal team has reviewed everything thoroughly. This is a non-issue." Perry slid a red leather folio onto the table, opened it, and spun it around so Claire could see the clause, underlined in blue ink. "I'm sure they have," he replied. "But as of this morning, that clause remains unamended. And your own bylaws, which you supplied last quarter, list Linda Chavez as both signatory and guarantor on that position." The room went still. Even the clink of forks on ceramic faded like the air was holding its breath. Claire's husband took a slow sip of water, not wine, water. He didn't look up, just stared at the table like maybe this was finally the moment he realized what he'd married. Claire straightened. "We'll clarify this with our legal team in the morning." Perry smiled. It wasn't kind. It was the smile of a man who knew you were about to run into a wall you yourself had built. "I suggest you do," he said. "Because as of now, the acquisition cannot proceed without her signature or a board-verified amendment to the clause, which, as far as I understand, hasn't happened." He closed the folio and set it gently beside his wine glass. "We'd rather not be in breach before the deal even starts." Nobody touched dessert. Later that night, Jules forwarded me a screenshot from someone on the buyer's junior legal team. The subject line was short and sharp. "Does Chavez still hold standing?" I replied with 2 words, "Ask Claire." Because the cracks weren't forming, they were already there. Claire just hadn't noticed the floor was sagging. Yet, the letter was only 1 page, printed on simple white paper. No theatrics, no bold fonts, no veiled threats, just precision. The kind of wording that makes a corporate attorney immediately sit up straighter and think, "We've missed something." To whom it may concern, this notice serves as formal confirmation of my continued standing as founding operations officer, as per incorporation filings and internal governance documents dated March 3, 2011. Pursuant to Clause 12(b) in the company's Articles of Internal Control, I hereby request a certified copy of all transaction documents related to any change in controlling interest, in accordance with my rights as signatory and compliance guarantor. Respectfully, Linda Chavez. I sent it at exactly 8:05 a.m., 2 hours before the start of their next all-hands meeting, and 5 minutes after I knew their junior counsel logged in every morning like clockwork. I didn't CC anyone, didn't blind copy a board member or drop hints in Slack, just hit send and closed my laptop. 10 minutes later, Jules messaged me. It started. Panic doesn't always look like screaming. Sometimes it looks like silence stretching longer than it should. Sometimes it looks like Claire's inner circle booking last-minute alignment, syncs that turn into 5-hour Zoom calls where no one turns their camera on. Within the hour, the consultants she'd hired, the ones who loved saying value mapping and pain points like they were casting spells, were already scrambling. Trying to reinterpret the clause like it was a badly translated IKEA manual. I imagine Claire stormed into the legal office demanding answers, and someone in a collar too tight finally told her, You can't just delete people out of paperwork like they're bad memories. Meanwhile, I was in a tiny upstairs room at Jules' firm, drinking weak coffee from a chipped mug, staring out the window at the city below. You sure you're not ready to make contact? Jules asked. Not yet, I said. Let them bury themselves a little deeper. Your restraint is either heroic or psychotic. Same thing in mergers and acquisitions. She laughed. It didn't reach her eyes. Even she could feel it now, the tension in the air. Like a cello string pulled taut between two skyscrapers. They knew I was still standing. But they didn't know how much I'd been watching. For example, I knew they'd hired a contract governance lead 3 days ago, some poor guy from a temp agency who listed Excel as a language on his resume. I knew the board hadn't yet been informed that my role was still active in the filings. I knew Claire had attempted to initiate a board vote to revise 12B last quarter, but had failed to reach quorum because 2 members were traveling. And I knew Dalton Price and Capital was getting restless. They'd started requesting draft clauses from our side, and someone, probably Perry, had already flagged the missing signature as a hard blocker. Not a speed bump. A brick wall. What none of them realized was that I didn't need to stop the deal. I just needed to exist. That was the brilliance of the clause. The signature wasn't a courtesy. It wasn't even a checkpoint. It was a structural pillar. Remove it and the building doesn't lean, it collapses. And Claire? Claire was still trying to bulldoze her way through it with spreadsheets and fake smiles, like the clause was some outdated parking policy instead of a legal landmine. At 11:13 a.m., I got a reply. Linda, we are in receipt of your notice. At this time, we are reviewing your stated standing and will provide the requested documents upon internal confirmation. Please allow 3 to 5 business days. I didn't respond. I forwarded it to Jules and went back to watching the homepage for the company's investor portal. They just added a banner, acquisition pending final sign-off. I almost felt bad. Almost. Call came in while Claire was in hair and makeup for a visionary women in tech photo shoot scheduled to run in the Fortune insert for the acquisition launch. They'd blocked off half the executive floor, brought in a fog machine, and even rented a potted fiddle leaf fig taller than the intern holding the lighting diffuser. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Local area code. She didn't recognize the voice on the other end, but the tone cut through the vanity noise immediately. Miss Harwood, this is Mason Grier. I'm on junior counsel under Gerald at Trowbridge and Smythe. I just wanted to informally flag something before tomorrow. Claire adjusted the gold necklace she'd borrowed from wardrobe and waved away a stylist. Make it quick. You may want to consider delaying the signing. There's a standing issue with the Founding Operations Officer Clause. The Chavez file remains active in the filings. It was never officially voided, and the board never voted to restructure 12B. She went still. We've already reviewed that, she snapped. With all due respect, ma'am, it doesn't look like that review was certified. The buyer's counsel has requested clarification. If this becomes a post-signature issue, indemnity won't hold. She hung up without another word. 15 minutes later, the stylist was gone, the photographer dismissed, and Claire was on the horn with her executive assistant, barking orders. Move the board meeting up. Today. 2 hours. Full quorum. But half the boards on flights, I don't care. Find them. She was already halfway down the corridor, heels slicing the silence like blades. By the time she reached the conference room, she'd already drafted a memo to override the voting order and was ready to strong-arm the remaining members into rubber stamping an emergency restructuring motion to eliminate any trace of my role. Desperation wears perfume too, her smelled like citrus and fear. Across the city, I stepped into Jules' office with a folder under my arm. A thick, heavy one, the kind that creaked when opened because the papers inside had actual weight, like they knew they mattered. It was labeled in my handwriting, Original Drafts Officer Writes. Jules didn't even say hello. She just slid her laptop aside and cleared space on the desk. Tell me this is what I think it is, she said. I dropped the folder and flipped it open. First page, Incorporation Charter, dated March 3, 2011. My name in print under Founding Operations Officer. Second page, the original bylaws with margin notes from a compliance advisor who'd since retired to Palm Springs. Third page, the Control Clause, version 1.3, the one before Claire's husband got cute with the language. Where'd you get these? She asked, running her fingers across the signature line. I never gave back my archive binder. Figured they'd try to revise history. She looked at me for a long moment, not admiration, not surprise, just confirmation. You want me to send this to the buyer's counsel? No, I said, not yet. I tapped the clause again. Claire's about to try and kill this paragraph in an emergency board session. She thinks if she can get a simple majority, she can retroactively nullify me. But without proper notice, legal review, and buy-in from the buyer's side, she's just digging a deeper grave. And when do you want to drop this on them? I smiled. When the pens come out, because Claire was still treating this like a PR problem. A story she could spin, revise, or silence. But stories told in ink and certified paper don't bend to narrative. They wait, and then they break you. The boardroom was a mausoleum with catered coffee. Stainless steel carafes, untouched pastries, bottled water sweating onto the lacquered oak. No small talk, no laughter. just the soft hum of air conditioning and the sound of impending doom trying to clear its throat. Claire sat at the head of the table, legs crossed, pen poised like she was about to bless a royal decree. She wore power-red lipstick and an expression she must have stolen from a politician in freefall. Calm on the outside, but her eyes flicked across every face like she was playing corporate whack-a-mole, daring someone to blink. To her right, her husband, the founder, a ghost in a tailored suit. He hadn't spoken in 2 days, not since the buyer flagged Clause 12B. He'd stared at the clause like it was a relic from a past life, one that remembered Linda Chavez a little too well. Claire tapped her pen on the leather pad in front of her. So, she said, let's proceed. At the far end of the table sat Perry Simmons, Dalton Price and Capital's lead counsel. Impeccable suit, cheaper tie, eyes that didn't blink unless billed hourly. He shuffled the documents once, slid them into place, and began walking through the signatures. Everything was theater now, Claire leaning forward. Her assistant adjusting the projector no one was using, board members nodding in performative agreement. Even the founder sat up straighter, pretending he still had some say in what was about to happen. Perry reached the last page, paused, and instead of signing he looked up. One name remains unsigned, he said, voice like ice cracking. Claire blinked. Excuse me, Perry didn't flinch. He slid the page not to her but to her husband. Linda Chavez, he said. Silence fell like a guillotine. The founder's hand hovered over the paper. For a second, just a second, something passed across his face. Recognition, regret. Didn't matter, he didn't touch it. Claire leaned in, trying to summon indignation. That's outdated. Linda was removed. Perry held up a hand. Calm, measured. She was terminated, not removed. Her standing was never formally dissolved via board vote, and the clause remains intact. We initiated a restructuring motion, which lacked the proper notice window, was not ratified by legal review, and was challenged in a notice of standing this morning, which we received a copy of. He tapped the folder in front of him. Inside, no doubt, was the same one Jules and I had prepared, the one with the original bylaws, the one with the signature clause no one could legally cross out with a Sharpie and a prayer. Claire's face lost color so fast it was like someone pulled the contrast down in real time. Her husband finally spoke. Quiet, gravelly. She kept everything, he said, almost to himself. Every draft, Perry nodded. Clause 12B, the transaction cannot proceed without her signature. Across the room, pens were slowly set down. You could hear the tiniest scrape of metal on leather as they surrendered, one by one. Claire tried to speak, tried to find footing on a floor that no longer existed. This is absurd. Perry looked at her the way a surgeon looks at a patient still trying to argue after being handed an X-ray of their own broken spine. It's not absurd, Miss Harwood. It's binding. He turned to the room. We'll pause signing until the appropriate party is present. And then, as if summoned by the tension itself, the double doors creaked open, and I walked in. The double doors didn't slam. They didn't burst. They opened like velvet curtains, slow, deliberate, and without apology. I walked in wearing the same shade of navy Claire once called invisible middle management blue. Fitting, 'cause invisible things have a funny way of coming back to haunt you when the ink's about to dry. Every head turned. Even the coffee stopped steaming. The founder froze like he'd seen a ghost with an impeccable folder system. Claire's pen hovered in midair, the tip shaking just slightly above the signature line that had waited all morning for names she thought she'd erased. I didn't pause, didn't blink. Just walked to the center of the table, set my folder down like a final stone on a grave, and clicked my pen once. That sound echoed like a gunshot in the silence. You wanted efficiency, I said, my voice clear but calm. I wanted clarity. No one moved. Claire opened her mouth, probably to sputter out some Frankenstein excuse, HR protocol, structural redundancy, something plucked from the same lexicon she used to gut the org chart like a surgeon with no pulse. But I didn't give her the chance. I opened the folder. Page 1, notarized affidavit confirming my original officer designation. Page 2, legal opinion affirming the current standing. Page 3, a printed copy of the email from their own junior counsel, time-stamped acknowledging my rights. And page 4, my demands. I'll sign, I said, addressing the entire board now. But first, 3 terms. Claire scoffed. The founder looked away. Term 1, a 1-year paid consultancy. Renewable by mutual agreement. Remote optional, scope defined by me. Someone across the table cleared their throat. Term 2, full indemnity from any post-signature fallout related to prior structural negligence, including but not limited to compliance oversight and clause mismanagement. The buyer's counsel nodded once. Perry was already taking notes. And term 3, I paused, turning directly to Claire now, an amendment. Clause 12B will be revised to require review and approval from independent compliance officers before any executive termination involving founding roles. No more backroom purges in heels and lipstick. Claire's face flushed a dangerous red. You can't just walk in here and I can, I said, because you built a castle on a foundation you didn't bother to check. And now you want to sell it without the keys to the front door. I turned to Perry, slid the signed amendment copy across the table. Once these are incorporated into the closing packet, I'll sign. Until then, this deal is an illegal fantasy. Silence again. The kind that comes with realizing the power balance has just shifted in a single breath. My folder now sat at the head of the table, not her agenda, not his silence. Mine. The founder looked at me with something that might have been remorse, or maybe just recognition that I'd become the only adult left in the room. And then I looked directly at Claire. You said my salary was an indulgence, I said, leaning in just enough. Well, this is your indulgence now, her jaw clenched, her knuckles white on the arms of the chair, but she didn't move. No one did. The room had become mine, not by shouting, not by threats, by being the last one who knew where the wires were buried and holding the match. Claire opened her mouth. Maybe to bargain, maybe to lie, maybe to claw her way out of the hole she'd personally dug and spray-painted progress on. But whatever script she had prepared died halfway between her brain and her tongue, because for the first time in recent memory, she didn't own the moment. Her husband spoke instead. Just sign it. 3 words, flat, absolute, like a verdict from someone who'd finally woken up and realized the Empress had no clothes, never owned the kingdom to begin with. Claire turned toward him, lips parted, stunned that he'd cut her off in public, in front of the board, in front of the buyer. But he didn't look at her. He was staring at the document in front of him like it was the autopsy report for everything they used to be. I slid my signature line forward, inked in black, my name already printed in bold. Linda Chavez, Founding Operations Officer. Co-signatory. Control Clause 12B. I signed without ceremony. No flourish, no smile, just presence. Perry didn't say a word. He slid the contract next to him, flipped 2 pages, and signed on behalf of Dalton Price and Capital. The deal was now real, final, sealed. Claire's hand trembled slightly as she added her name, not to the deal, to my terms. I gathered my folder, neat, pristine, still warm from its victory lap, and stood up. No applause. No congratulations. Just a room full of people who realized they'd watched a scalpel dismantle a guillotine in slow motion. I walked out. The elevator ride down was silent. Not dramatic, just quiet in the way something is when it no longer owes you noise. At the curb, a black town car waited with the back door already open. Inside sat Jules, phone in hand, reviewing a new round of onboarding paperwork. Not for a lawsuit, for an executive placement. I slid in beside her. She handed me a tablet. Title: Chief Compliance Officer Dalton Price and Capital North American Portfolio Division. The ink wasn't even dry, and I was already building the next firewall against people like Claire. Start date? Jules asked. Today, I said. Across town, Claire remained in the boardroom. Everyone had left, even her husband. Just her now, alone with the ghost of her own hubris, staring at the glass walls that once made her feel powerful. Her reflection looked back at her. No victory, no vision, just the lingering outline of a woman who mistook shortcuts for strategy and signatures for submission. She once said, "Your salary was an indulgence." Now, Claire's signature was mine. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.